A few months ago, I made a video talking about some of the things I learned from teaching my friend how to code for the first time. Now, if you haven't seen that video, I would definitely recommend checking that out before watching this one. This kind of builds on top of it, but a lot of people really liked that video. So this is everything that I didn't manage to fit into that video because I didn't have time. All the other lessons that I learned from teaching my friend how to code. Part 2. First things first, a lot of people give up on coding, and that is totally okay. In fact, that is what happened with my friend. They spent a few months on it, they were really excited at first, and then that initial excitement started to fade, and they realized they weren't sure if that's really what they wanted to do anymore. This is a decision that a lot of people have to make, and in some cases they don't even actively make it, they just start coding less and less and less, and then it just becomes something that they don't do anymore. Last year I actually made a whole video where I talked about whether or not you should give up on coding. So if you are someone who's on the fence and you've been thinking about giving up, or you're working with someone who seems to be thinking about giving up on coding, I would highly recommend giving that video a watch. Coding attracts a lot of people at first for one reason or another, but to actually get proficient at it is going to take a lot of time and dedication. It's also worth pointing out that just because someone gives up on coding now does not mean they will never come back to it. I talk about this all the time. The first 2 times that I tried coding, I gave up within probably a month, and it wasn't until my 3rd try when I was a sophomore in high school that I actually stuck with coding. Sometimes it just takes a couple of tries, and you just need to try learning it a different way, or that person needs to find something that's really gonna motivate them to actually wanna stick with it, or they just need to try at a different part of the stack. Ultimately, and this applies to lots of other things in life as well, they need to want to do the work. You can try to offer your help, but they need to be open to it and they need to want it for themselves. If someone's made up their mind or they just don't want to listen to you, it doesn't matter how much you want to help, they're not gonna take it. In the same way that a lot of people want to learn how to play piano or guitar because they see an expert playing it and it seems like the coolest thing in the world, a lot of people get into coding because they want to build the next ChatGPT or Call of Duty or anything else like that. Basically, the really advanced or complicated stuff is what gets people excited about learning how to code without recognizing the fact that those things are built by these huge teams of people who all contribute just a very tiny piece to it, and that it takes years and years of experience and hard work to even get to that point. I'm not here to crush anyone's dreams because everyone has to start from zero. But it is a very long road, and it's probably different than what most people are envisioning. For me, in middle school, this was building iOS games. At the time, they were just starting to get popular, and I had these visions that I was going to build these wildly popular iOS games by myself as a middle schooler, and I was going to get filthy rich while I was doing it. Needless to say, that is not what happened. And this is exactly why I burnt out the first 2 times that I tried coding. I would sit down for a couple of weeks, I'd be really excited. I thought I was gonna build this great big app out of thin air without having any real experience. And then the reality would set in, which is that I needed to learn a lot of fundamentals, and it's actually really hard to build a great app from scratch in middle school when you have no clue what you're doing. And then I would lose interest and I would give up. I was interested in the outputs of what that code could build. I was not interested in actually learning how to code and doing the work. It's great to have a vision and things that are motivating you, but it's also smart to temper your expectations. Setting smaller and more achievable milestones and things to get excited about can help you maintain momentum as opposed to just getting completely overwhelmed by how much there is to learn when you're new to coding. I didn't include this point in part 1 because it's hard to say definitively whether or not this is a bad thing, but it is definitely something to keep in mind. I have been making videos on this channel for over 5 years, and I have still never made a video where I talk about what languages people should use and which tools they should use when they are brand new to coding. Because while I know how I learned how to code and I have my own biases from the things that I've worked on that I've liked and that I don't like, none of those is the best way to learn how to code. For me to make a video like that would require me to do a lot of research to really understand what are actually the best things to do and the things to avoid, as opposed to just saying, well, this is how I did it and it worked well for me, so you should do that too. But if you're just casually teaching someone how to code and you started with Python and you like it and you know Python, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to recommend to your friend that they start with Python. And I remember a number of years ago, I had people that I knew who were talking to me about learning how to code, and I was recommending they start with C++ because that's what I started with, and at the time, that was my favorite language. The truth is, for a lot of people, I can guarantee you, starting with C++ is not the best answer. But because that's what I started with and I liked it and that's what I knew, that's what I was telling other people to do. Beyond just languages and tools though, you'll have your own unique style of writing code that to some extent you're going to pass along to whoever you're working with. Especially when it comes to front-end development, I have a specific style of development that I typically use, and while I wasn't teaching my friend to write code that way, the suggestions that I was giving were definitely in line with the way that I write code. So I am sure that the way that I build stuff in the front end was influencing the way they were learning how to write code in the front end. Now, I'm not going to say whether or not that's a good or a bad thing. All I'm going to say is it is going to influence how they learn how to code. If someone else was teaching my friend how to code that wasn't me, they probably would have given them different recommendations, and my friend probably would have learned some different things than what I was teaching them. This is probably going to be most applicable to anyone who's doing mini projects. If you're just following exercises in a book or on a website that are pretty small and atomic, this probably isn't going to come up too much. If you decide to try doing a fun project to supplement all of the structured learning that you're doing, you will almost inevitably run into a lot of things that you do not know how to do. This is inherently part of the fun if you enjoy coding. You'll learn new things along the way, you challenge yourself, and at the end you have this accomplishment of look at this cool thing that I built. It can also be incredibly frustrating if you are constantly running into problems and you can't figure out how to make them work. And this is related to a point that I made in part 1 of this video. If you're the person who's working with the friend who is struggling, it is going to be super tempting to swoop in and just solve the problem for them. If you know that you can knock something out in half an hour and they're going to spend the next week banging their head against the wall and not getting anywhere, it's going to feel like you're helping. From my own experience, from having gone through this exact same scenario, you're probably just hindering their development. So much of learning how to code is about learning how to figure things out. That's not just when you're new, that's always. If you're constantly stepping in and solving all of the hard parts of whatever your friend is working on, yes, you're going to keep them moving along, but they're also not really learning how to problem solve. And another thing that I can say from experience, just explaining what you did after the fact is not going to have the same effect as them figuring it out for themselves. Obviously, this doesn't mean that you can't help them at all and you just need to stand there and watch them suffer, but there's a big difference between giving hints and pointing people in the right direction versus sitting down at the keyboard and just hammering out the code yourself. This one might feel like a little bit of a weird one to be tacking onto the end of this list, but it's something that I did from the very beginning with my friend, and ultimately, I was very glad that I did. As anyone with coding experience knows, it is very easy to screw up a codebase that was previously working, and then all of a sudden things aren't working. This is frustrating enough when you're experienced, but when you're new and you just spent several hours trying to figure something out and you finally got it working, and then several hours later, all of a sudden everything is now broken, that is incredibly frustrating, and that is the type of thing that is going to make you want to close the laptop and never try coding again because it just was so frustrating and you spent your whole day on that and now it's all broken again and you don't know how to fix it. That is a terrible feeling. That is why teaching someone how to use source control and actually getting them in the habit of regularly checking in their code is such a good idea. I'm not saying they need to be an expert. You don't even need to have multiple branches or do anything fancy in Git or any other form of source control. You really just need the basics. Just having a commit history with useful messages so that if something does get screwed up, you can roll back the code is such a great place to start. And it's something that I wish more new devs did because it's pretty common for people to not really use source control until they get into industry. If we could get more people using it from the beginning or almost the very beginning, honestly, I think that would be amazing. All right, hopefully if you're learning how to code or you're teaching someone else to learn how to code, some of those points are helpful. If you haven't already, definitely check out part 1. There's a lot of other really good stuff in that video. Anyways, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.